Queen Talara stood at the center of the Galactic Council chamber, her silver robes catching the light from 1,000 distant stars visible through the transparent dome above. She was tired. So incredibly tired. 2 years had passed since her husband died, and every single day had been a battle. A battle to lead her empire, a battle to maintain alliances, and worst of all, a battle to watch her daughter fade away like a dying star. The council members waited in silence, their various forms and features representing dozens of different species from across known space. Some had scales, others had crystalline bodies that refracted light in strange ways. A few existed partially in other dimensions, their forms flickering in and out of normal perception. But they all shared one thing in common right now: intense curiosity about why the Vorian Queen had called this emergency session. Talara took a breath and spoke. Honored members of the council, I come before you today with an unconventional proposal. My daughter, Princess Myra, needs a father. The Empire needs stability. Therefore, I am inviting 5 of the galaxy's most powerful emperors to court my daughter's favor. In 1 week's time, she will choose which one will become my consort and her new father. The chamber erupted. Voices overlapped in a dozen languages, translators struggling to keep up. This was unprecedented. Shocking. Some called it brilliant politics, others called it madness. But Talara had made her decision, and within hours, the invitations were sent across the stars. The palace transformed overnight. Servants who usually maintained the quiet dignity of the royal household now scrambled to prepare for the arrival of 5 massive delegations. Banners were hung, guest wings were prepared, and the kitchens worked around the clock to accommodate the dietary needs of species who ate everything from liquid methane to compressed starlight. Jack Morrison noticed all of this chaos, but it didn't really affect him much. His shift started at midnight and ended at 8 in the morning, when most of the palace was still asleep. He'd been working as a janitor here for 3 years now, ever since he'd taken the job through an intergalactic work program. The pay was decent, the benefits were incredible by Earth standards, and most importantly, it let him send enough money home to give his daughter Katie a good life back in Ohio. He was 42 years old, with graying hair at his temples and the kind of sturdy build that came from years of physical work. Nothing special. Nothing remarkable. Just a guy doing his job, pushing a cleaning cart through halls made of materials Earth scientists hadn't even discovered yet. That first night after the announcement, Jack was mopping the floor near the garden terrace when he heard it, a small, broken sound. Crying. He looked around and spotted a tiny figure huddled on one of the stone benches partially hidden by flowering vines that glowed softly in the dark. Jack hesitated. He wasn't supposed to interact with the royal family. That was in the employee handbook, page 3, in bold letters. But he'd never been good at following rules when someone was hurting, especially a kid. His own daughter was about the same age as the princess, maybe a year younger. He walked over slowly, making sure his footsteps were loud enough to hear. Didn't want to startle her. "Hey there," he said gently. "You all right?" Princess Myra looked up, her large eyes reflecting the starlight. She had delicate features and skin that seemed to shimmer slightly with a faint blue undertone, a trait of Vorian royalty. She looked exhausted and scared. "I'm not supposed to be out here," she said quietly. Jack glanced around. "Well, I won't tell if you won't. Mind if I sit down? My feet are killing me." He didn't wait for permission, just sat on the other end of the bench with a slight groan that was only partially exaggerated. "Long shift tonight. They've got me cleaning every hallway twice because of all the fancy visitors coming." Myra sniffled and wiped her eyes. "The emperors." "Yeah, those guys. Must be pretty exciting, huh? All that attention." The princess shook her head, and fresh tears spilled down her cheeks. "I don't want them to come. I don't want any of this. I just want my dad back." Her voice broke on the last word. Jack felt his chest tighten. He knew that pain. His wife had died 4 years ago, and Katie had cried just like this for months afterward. "I'm sorry, kiddo. Losing someone you love is the hardest thing in the world." They sat in silence for a moment, just the sound of the night breeze rustling through alien plants and the distant hum of the palace systems. Then Jack reached into his lunchbox and pulled out a wrapped sandwich. "You hungry? It's just peanut butter and jelly, but it's pretty good." Myra looked at the offered food with confusion. "What's peanut butter?" "Oh man, you're missing out. Here, try half. Fair warning though, it might stick to the roof of your mouth a little bit." She took a small bite, chewed thoughtfully, and then took a bigger bite. They sat together eating in comfortable silence while stars wheeled overhead. For the first time in months, Princess Myra felt something other than crushing anxiety and grief. She felt almost normal. And Jack, without realizing it, had just taken the first step toward changing the entire galaxy. The first emperor arrived with enough fanfare to wake half the planet. His name was Draxius, ruler of the Crimson Armada, and he believed in making an entrance. 300 warships descended through the atmosphere in perfect formation, their hulls painted blood red and gleaming like freshly polished armor. The ships arranged themselves in the sky to spell out his dynasty's symbol, a clenched fist holding lightning. It was impressive. It was also incredibly loud and somewhat terrifying for an 8-year-old girl. Myra stood beside her mother on the greeting platform, wearing formal robes that felt too heavy on her small shoulders. Her hands were clasped tightly in front of her, knuckles white. When Emperor Draxius descended the ramp from his flagship, the ground actually shook with each step. He was enormous, nearly 9 feet tall, with dark metallic skin and eyes that glowed like molten gold. He knelt before Myra, which somehow made him even more intimidating because now those burning eyes were level with hers. "Little princess," he rumbled, his voice like grinding boulders, "choose me as your father and I will teach you the ways of strength. No enemy will ever threaten you again. The entire galaxy will tremble at the mention of your name." Myra managed a tiny nod, too scared to speak. The meeting lasted 30 minutes of Draxius describing various military campaigns, showing holographic displays of conquered worlds, and demonstrating a weapon that could shatter moons. When it finally ended, Myra's legs were shaking so badly she could barely walk back to her chambers. The second emperor came the next day. Emperor Voltar represented the merchant collective, and where Draxius brought intimidation, Voltar brought seduction through wealth. His ship landed and opened like a flower, revealing corridors literally paved with precious gems. He was shorter than Draxius but somehow took up more space, his personality filling every room he entered. He presented Myra with gifts, a necklace made from captured starlight, a pet creature from a distant world that sang in harmonious tones, dresses woven from materials so rare that each one cost more than a small planet's economy. "Anything you desire, young princess, can be yours," Voltar said with a smile that showed too many teeth. "The universe is a marketplace, and I own most of it. Say the word, and galaxies will empty their treasuries at your feet." Myra looked at all the gifts piled around her and felt nothing but exhaustion. She tried to smile, tried to seem grateful, but all she could think about was how much she wanted to be alone. Voltar took her silence as being overwhelmed by generosity and left satisfied with his presentation. The third day brought Empress Solara of the Psionic Collective. She was beautiful in an otherworldly way, her form constantly shifting slightly as if she existed in multiple realities at once. She didn't bring armies or treasures. Instead, she demonstrated power over the mind itself. With a gesture, she made the entire court see visions, beautiful gardens, impossible architecture, memories that never happened but felt completely real. She approached Myra and placed a cool hand on the girl's forehead. Suddenly, Myra could hear every thought in the room. The servants thinking about dinner. Guards worrying about their posts. Her mother's anxiety like a crushing weight. It was too much, far too much. Myra gasped and stumbled backward, and Solara withdrew her touch with a knowing smile. "Imagine," the Empress whispered, "never being surprised. Never being lied to. Knowing every secret, wielding every truth. This could be your inheritance." Myra spent that afternoon hiding in her bathroom, hands pressed over her ears even though the voices were gone, trying not to cry. The fourth emperor was Korvax of the Silicon Empire, more machine than organic being. He brought technology that bent the laws of physics, devices that could stop time in small bubbles, nanobots that could rebuild matter at the molecular level, AI systems that could predict the future with disturbing accuracy. He spoke in precise, calculated sentences about efficiency and optimization. He suggested that Myra could be improved, enhanced, made better than her biology allowed. The princess sat through his presentation feeling less like a person and more like a project to be upgraded. Korvax never once asked what she wanted. He simply assumed she would want to be more than she was. The fifth and final emperor arrived on day 5. Lord Typhon ruled the Storm Dominion, and his element was chaos itself. He commanded weather patterns, could summon hurricanes with a thought, and his very presence made the air feel charged with electricity. He was wild, unpredictable, laughing loudly and speaking in riddles. He told Myra that life was meant to be exciting, dangerous, thrilling. That safety was just another word for boredom. He created a small tornado in the throne room, lifting furniture into the air just to prove he could. Myra watched a priceless vase shatter against the ceiling and felt a tear roll down her cheek. She wanted her father, who had been gentle and kind. Who had read her stories and checked for monsters under her bed. These emperors were powerful, yes. Impressive, certainly. But not one of them felt like a father. Not one of them felt safe. That night, Myra ran through the empty halls past midnight, her formal slippers making soft sounds on marble floors. She was looking for the only person in the entire palace who made her feel like herself. She found Jack in the west corridor, humming quietly to himself while polishing a brass railing that probably didn't need polishing. "Rough day?" he asked, not looking up from his work. Myra burst into tears and nodded. Jack set down his rag and opened his arms. She ran into them like coming home. The pressure was getting worse each day. Queen Talara could feel it closing in around her like a vice. The 5 emperors had stopped being polite. Now they were making demands, veiled threats wrapped in diplomatic language. Emperor Draxius casually mentioned how unfortunate it would be if military support was withdrawn during the upcoming trade route negotiations. Voltaire smiled while discussing how economic sanctions could devastate smaller economies. Even Empress Solara, with her soft voice, hinted at how alliances could shift overnight if proper respect wasn't shown. Talara sat in her private chambers late at night, holding her head in her hands. She thought giving Myra a choice would empower her daughter, would help her heal. Instead, she trapped the poor girl in an impossible situation. Every option felt wrong. Every path seemed to lead to more pain. Meanwhile, Myra was falling apart. She stopped eating properly. The palace physician reported that the princess was barely sleeping, waking up screaming from nightmares 3 or 4 times each night. Dark circles appeared under her eyes. She flinched whenever anyone spoke too loudly. The servants whispered in corners, worried about the fragile little girl who used to laugh and play in the gardens. The only time Myra seemed remotely okay was during the late-night hours, and the staff began to notice a pattern. Around 1 in the morning, like clockwork, the princess would slip out of her chambers. At first, her guards were alarmed and wanted to stop her. But then they realized where she was going and who she was meeting, and somehow word never made it back to the queen. The guards had hearts too. They could see what was happening. Jack had become Myra's anchor to sanity. He didn't plan it, didn't try to make it happen. It just evolved naturally, the way real friendships do. That second night, when she'd found him and cried, he'd simply held her until she calmed down. Then he'd done what came naturally, he'd treated her like his own daughter Katie. "All right kiddo," he'd said, pulling a thermos from his cart. "Hot chocolate. Best medicine in the universe. Well, in my universe anyway. Not sure how it ranks out here in space." She'd sipped it carefully, the warmth spreading through her. "It's good," she'd whispered. "Darn right it's good. My mom's recipe. Now, you want to talk about what's wrong, or you want to help me clean this hallway? Sometimes keeping your hands busy helps your brain settle down." Myra had chosen helping, and Jack had given her a clean cloth and showed her how to dust the lower shelves of a display case. They'd worked in comfortable silence for 20 minutes before she finally started talking. Not about the emperors directly, but about her father. How he used to take her to the observation deck to watch meteor showers. How he'd make up silly songs about their pet palace creatures. How safe she'd felt when he was alive. Jack listened. Really listened. He didn't try to fix anything or offer solutions. He just nodded and said, "Yeah, I get that," or "That sounds really hard." Sometimes that's all people need, someone to witness their pain without trying to make it go away too quickly. This became their routine. Every night around 1 in the morning, Myra would find Jack somewhere in the palace. Sometimes he was mopping floors, sometimes organizing supply closets. Once he was fixing a broken door hinge because maintenance was backed up. She'd sit on his cleaning cart or pull up a chair, and they'd talk while he worked. Jack told her about Earth. About seasons changing and snow that fell from the sky. About baseball games and county fairs and fireflies in summer. He showed her pictures of Katie on his datapad, his daughter playing soccer, covered in mud and grinning like she'd won the lottery. "She's a handful," he'd say with obvious pride. "Takes after her mom. Stubborn as a mule but braver than anyone I know." He taught Myra things that had nothing to do with ruling empires or political strategy. He showed her how to fold paper into shapes, cranes and boats and little jumping frogs. He taught her card games and told her jokes that were so corny she couldn't help but laugh. He shared his snacks, chips and cookies and fruit that came from Earth, exotic treats from a distant world that tasted like childhood and simplicity. One night, about 4 days into the Emperor visits, Myra arrived with her hands shaking. "I had to meet with Emperor Korvax again today," she said quietly. "He brought these machines that he wants to put in my brain. He says they'll make me smarter, faster, better at everything. Mom said I should be grateful he's taking such an interest." Jack stopped mopping and looked at her seriously. Do you want machines in your brain? No, she whispered. But maybe I should? Maybe I'm not good enough the way I am? Jack set down his mop and knelt in front of her, putting them at eye level. Listen to me, Myra. You are already enough. Exactly as you are, right now, you are enough. Don't let anyone tell you different. Not an emperor, not a fancy machine, not anyone. Tears streamed down her face. But I'm just me. I'm not special. Kid, being just you is the most special thing you can be. You know why? Because there's only one you in the entire universe. You're not supposed to be like those emperors. You're supposed to be like Myra. She threw her arms around his neck and sobbed. Jack held her, patting her back awkwardly the way dads do, and let her cry it out. When she finally pulled back, he offered her his handkerchief, an actual cloth handkerchief that he carried because his own dad had always carried one. Better? He asked. She nodded, wiping her eyes. Good. Now, I've got a whole wing to clean, and honestly, these floors are looking pretty rough. Think you can help me out? Myra smiled, a real smile, maybe the first one in weeks. Yeah. I can help. They worked side by side in the quiet palace, a janitor and a princess, while somewhere far away the 5 emperors plotted and planned, never suspecting that they'd already lost to a man with a mop and a kind heart. The guards watched from their posts and said nothing. The cleaning staff noticed and kept their secrets. And Queen Talara, reviewing security footage late one night, saw her daughter laughing for the first time in months and felt something shift in her chest. Sometimes the answer you're looking for isn't the one you expected. Sometimes it's been right in front of you all along, wearing a maintenance uniform and carrying a thermos of hot chocolate. The morning of the choosing ceremony arrived with brilliant sunshine streaming through the palace's crystal domes. Across 200 worlds, billions of beings tuned in to watch what everyone assumed would be a historic political alliance. Betting pools had been running all week. Most predicted Emperor Draxius would win. Military power usually trumped everything else in galactic politics. Others favored Voltaire and his endless wealth. The odds on the other 3 were lower but still respectable. Nobody, and I mean absolutely nobody, had Jack Morrison on their list. The throne room had been transformed into something out of a fever dream. Holographic projectors created floating gardens of light. Musicians from 12 different species played a harmony that shouldn't have been possible but somehow worked. The 5 emperors stood in a line, each dressed in their finest ceremonial attire, looking like they'd stepped out of legends. Behind them, their delegations filled the hall, hundreds of advisors, guards, and diplomats representing the most powerful forces in known space. Jack was in the maintenance wing, 3 floors down, completely unaware of what was about to happen. He was training a new hire, showing the kid how to properly strip and wax a floor. See, you gotta let the stripper sit for at least 5 minutes, he was saying. If you rush it, you'll be fighting that old wax all day and... Morrison. His supervisor burst through the door, looking panicked. You need to get to the throne room. Now. What? Why? I'm not scheduled for event cleanup until after. Just go. They're asking for you specifically. Something about the ceremony. Jack looked down at his uniform, which had a coffee stain on the front and smelled faintly of cleaning solution. I can't go to a royal ceremony looking like this. No time. Move it. Meanwhile, in the throne room, the ceremony had begun. Queen Talara sat on her throne, looking every inch the powerful ruler she was, though anyone who knew her well could see the tension in her shoulders. Myra stood in front of the assembled crowd, a tiny figure in elaborate robes that seemed to swallow her whole. She looked pale and scared, her hands clasped so tightly her fingers had gone white. The master of ceremonies, a dignified old diplomat named Rethis, spoke in a booming voice that echoed through the hall and across the broadcast. We are gathered today to witness Princess Myra's choice. 5 of the galaxy's greatest leaders have presented themselves. The princess will now select who will become royal consort and her adopted father. Each emperor stepped forward in turn to make their final pitch. Draxius spoke of strength and protection, his voice powerful enough to make the floor vibrate. Voltaire painted pictures of unlimited wealth and luxury. Solara promised knowledge and power beyond imagination. Korvax offered technological advancement and efficiency. Typhon described a life of excitement and adventure. Myra listened to each one, her expression growing more miserable with every word. When they finished, Rethis turned to her. Princess Myra, the choice is yours. Who do you select? The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop on the other side of the palace. Billions of beings leaned closer to their screens. The emperors stood straighter, each one confident they'd be chosen. Myra's voice came out small at first, barely a whisper. I choose. She paused, took a breath, and spoke louder. I choose Jack Morrison. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Nobody breathed. The name meant nothing to the watching galaxy. Then confusion rippled through the crowd like a wave. Who? Emperor Draxius demanded. What is this? Voltar looked around, bewildered. Queen Talara stood up from her throne, and even she looked surprised. Myra, who is? Jack Morrison, Myra repeated, louder this time. The janitor. I choose him. The throne room erupted into chaos. Emperors shouted. Diplomats frantically checked their data files. The crowd buzzed with confusion. The broadcast commentators stammered, completely lost. In living rooms and command centers across the galaxy, beings turned to each other asking the same question, who in the world is Jack Morrison? That's when Jack himself arrived, still being pushed along by his supervisor. He stumbled into the throne room through a side entrance, took one look at the assembled crowd of the most powerful beings in existence, and froze like a deer in headlights. There he is, Myra said, and before anyone could stop her, she ran across the polished floor, her ceremonial robes flying behind her. She grabbed Jack's hand with both of hers. This is who I choose. Jack. Jack looked down at the princess, then up at the crowd, then at the 5 emperors who were staring at him with expressions ranging from confusion to outrage. Ah, he said, which was broadcast to 200 worlds. I think there's been some kind of mistake. There's no mistake, Myra said firmly, still holding his hand. You asked me what I wanted. You're the only one who asked. You're the only one who's been nice to me. You don't want anything from me except for me to be okay. Her voice cracked. Please don't leave me alone with them. Emperor Draxius stepped forward, his face dark with anger. This is an outrage. I am the supreme commander of the Crimson Armada. I have conquered 40 systems. And you would choose a janitor. A human janitor, Empress Solara added, her beautiful face twisted with disgust. A being from a backwater planet who cleans floors for a living. Jack felt his face flush red. He tried to pull his hand away from Myra's, but she held on tighter. Look, he said, addressing the emperors because he didn't know what else to do, they're right. I'm nobody. I mop floors. I unclog toilets. I'm not royalty material. There's obviously been some kind of... You're nice, Myra interrupted, looking up at him with tears streaming down her face. That's more important than all their power and money and ships. You make me feel safe. You make me laugh. You remind me of my dad. She turned to face her mother. Please, Mom. I can't do this. I can't choose one of them. They don't see me. They see a thing to own, a connection to power. Jack sees me. Queen Talara looked at her daughter, really looked at her, for the first time in weeks. She saw the dark circles under her eyes, the weight she'd lost, the fear that had become permanent in her expression. Then she looked at Jack Morrison, standing there in his stained uniform, clearly terrified, but not pulling away from Myra. Not abandoning her even though he obviously wanted to run. The Queen made a decision that would change the course of galactic history. She descended from her throne and walked across the floor until she stood in front of Jack. Do you care for my daughter? She asked quietly. Jack swallowed hard. She's a good kid. She deserves better than. He gestured vaguely at the chaos around them. Better than all this pressure and politics. She deserves to just be a kid. That's not what I asked. Jack looked down at Myra, who was still clutching his hand like a lifeline. He thought about Katie back home, about how he'd want someone to treat her if she was scared and alone. Yeah, he said finally. Yeah, I care about her. Queen Talara nodded once, then turned to address the throne room. My daughter has chosen. Jack Morrison will become royal consort. The emperors lost their minds. Threats flew. Draxius promised military consequences. Voltar talked about economic collapse. But Talara raised her hand, and somehow, her voice cut through it all. Gentlemen. Lady. You came here seeking power through marriage. My daughter chose someone who sought nothing at all. Perhaps there's a lesson in that. Now get out of my palace. And just like that, the entire galaxy shifted on its axis. The first week after the ceremony was absolute chaos. Jack moved through the palace in a daze, still half convinced this was all some elaborate prank or weird dream he'd wake up from any moment. They'd taken away his janitor uniform and given him formal robes that felt like wearing a fancy curtain. He had advisors following him around, trying to teach him proper etiquette and royal protocols. He kept forgetting which fork to use at dinner and once accidentally sat in the Queen's chair because nobody told him that specific seat was off limits. The galactic news networks were having a field day. Headlines screamed things like royal insult and the janitor prince and have the Vorians lost their minds. Political commentators debated endlessly about what this meant for interstellar relations. Late-night talk show hosts made jokes. Memes spread across the galaxy faster than light speed. Pictures of Jack in his maintenance uniform next to images of the furious emperors, captioned with things like when you max out charm stats instead of power. But something unexpected was happening beneath all the mockery and outrage. On factory worlds where millions toiled in difficult conditions, workers watched the news and felt something they hadn't felt in years: hope. A janitor had been chosen over emperors. One of them had made it to the top. In mining colonies and agricultural planets, in service industries and construction zones, ordinary people started talking. If Jack Morrison could end up at a queen's side, maybe they weren't as powerless as they'd always believed. Protests started small. 100 workers on a manufacturing planet refusing unfair overtime. A few thousand demanding better safety equipment. But it spread like wildfire. Within 2 weeks, there were demonstrations on 40 different worlds. The signs they carried said things like "We are all Jack Morrison, and janitors are people too." It wasn't a violent revolution, it was something more fundamental. People were remembering their own dignity. The emperors, meanwhile, were discovering that their threats weren't landing the way they expected. When Draxius tried to withdraw military support from 3 allied systems, those systems simply didn't panic. They started talking to each other, forming their own mutual defense agreements. When Voltaire threatened economic sanctions, smaller trading worlds banded together and created new partnerships that bypassed his networks entirely. The emperors had always maintained power by keeping everyone else divided and afraid. Suddenly, nobody seemed as afraid anymore. Jack was completely unaware of most of this at first. He was too busy trying not to mess up his new life. The hardest part wasn't the fancy clothes or the formal dinners, it was figuring out how to actually help Myra. She'd chosen him as a father figure, and that responsibility terrified him more than any emperor's threats. The first real conversation they had after the ceremony happened 3 days later. Myra found him standing on a balcony at dawn, looking overwhelmed. "You okay?" she asked quietly. Jack laughed without humor. "Kid, I have no idea what I'm doing. I clean things for a living. I don't know anything about being royal or politics or any of this." "Good," Myra said. He looked down at her, confused. "Good. Everyone else here knows all that stuff, and they're miserable. You know different things. Important things." She leaned against the railing beside him. "You know how to make people feel better. You know how to listen. You know that hot chocolate helps sad people and that sometimes you just need to fold paper cranes until your brain calms down." Jack felt his throat get tight. "Your dad, he was probably better at this than me." "He was really good at it," Myra agreed. "But you're good at it too. Just in your own way." She looked up at him with those serious eyes. "I don't need you to be him. I just need you to be you." From that moment, something clicked into place. Jack stopped trying to be what he thought a royal consort should be and started just being himself. And weirdly, it worked. His first official diplomatic meeting was with representatives from a labor dispute on an industrial world. The formal diplomats had been trying to resolve it for months with no success. Jack walked into the room, looked at the exhausted workers and stressed managers, and said, "All right, I used to work maintenance in a factory back on Earth, so let's skip the fancy talk. What's actually wrong here?" The workers, shocked to be addressed like regular people, started talking. Really talking. Jack listened, asked questions that came from actual experience with physical labor, and then turned to the managers. "Look, these folks aren't asking for much. They want bathroom breaks that don't get them written up and safety equipment that actually works. That seems pretty reasonable, doesn't it?" Something about his straightforward approach cut through months of formal negotiations. Within 2 hours, they'd hammered out an agreement that satisfied everyone. The workers went back to their jobs. The managers were relieved. And Jack had accidentally discovered his talent. He spoke the language of regular people because he was regular people. Queen Talara started sending him to more negotiations. Disputes that had been deadlocked for years somehow got resolved when Jack showed up and treated everyone like humans, or whatever species they were, instead of political chess pieces. He didn't use complicated diplomatic language. He just asked questions like, "Okay, but what do you actually need? And can we find a middle ground here? And that seems unfair, why are we doing it that way?" Myra blossomed during this time. With Jack in her life, she started smiling again, playing again, being a kid again. He set up a weekly tradition. Every Sunday morning, no matter what was happening politically, he and Myra would clean one section of the palace together. Not because it needed cleaning, the staff handled that, but because he wanted to teach her that honest work wasn't something to be ashamed of. "Why do we do this?" she asked one Sunday while they were dusting library shelves. "Because nobody's too important to do real work," Jack said. "The second you start thinking you're above mopping a floor is the second you forget where you came from. And trust me, kid, forgetting where you came from is how you become one of those emperors, powerful but miserable." 6 months after the ceremony, something remarkable happened. Emperor Draxius requested a private meeting with Jack. Not with Queen Talara, not with the diplomatic corps. With Jack specifically. They met in a simple conference room. Draxius looked uncomfortable, like this was the last place he wanted to be. "I came to discuss the labor reforms happening across my territories," he said stiffly. "You mean the protests?" Jack asked. "Yes. The protests." Draxius struggled with the word like it tasted bad. "My advisors say to crush them. To make examples. But..." He trailed off. "But..." Jack prompted. "But I watched your negotiations with the Tridian Mining Consortium. You treated workers like they mattered. Like their concerns were valid." Draxius looked genuinely confused. And it worked. They went back to work. They were grateful. Happy, even. "I've never achieved that result through force, and I've tried." Jack leaned back in his chair. "Can I be real with you? Please. Power through fear only works until people stop being afraid. And right now, across the galaxy, people are remembering they don't have to be scared all the time." Jack paused. "You've got a choice. You can fight this and probably lose eventually, or you can adapt. Figure out what your people actually need and give it to them. Not because you're weak, but because it's the smarter play." Draxius sat quietly for a long moment. Then, "Show me how." Over the next year, similar conversations happened with each of the 5 emperors. One by one, they came to Jack, sometimes openly, sometimes secretly, asking for advice. The janitor who they'd scorned became the person they turned to because he had something they lacked, the trust of ordinary people. Reforms spread across the galaxy. Not everywhere, and not perfectly, but things got better. Working conditions improved. Voices that had never been heard before started being included in decisions. The power structure didn't collapse, it just shifted. Became more balanced. More fair. 2 years after the ceremony, Jack stood in that same throne room where his life had changed. It was Myra's 10th birthday, and the hall was filled with beings from across the galaxy, not just nobility, but regular workers, families, people who'd benefited from the changes that had swept through their worlds. Myra stood beside him, confident and happy, no longer the scared little girl she'd been. Queen Talara watched them both with obvious pride. And Jack, still wearing the simple style of clothes he preferred despite being able to wear anything, thought about how weird life was. He'd come to an alien planet to mop floors and send money home to Katie. He'd ended up accidentally starting a galaxy-wide movement just by being decent to a sad kid. Later that night, after the party ended, Jack found his usual spot on the balcony. Myra joined him, like she often did. "Do you miss it?" she asked. "Your old life?" Jack thought about it honestly. "Sometimes. It was simpler. But I wouldn't trade this for anything." He put his arm around her shoulders. "You know why?" "Why?" "Because I got a second daughter out of the deal. And you're worth all the complicated political stuff." Myra hugged him tight. "Best choice I ever made." "Kid," Jack said with a smile, "you have no idea how many people would agree with you. And somewhere out there, on hundreds of worlds, millions of ordinary people living better lives would have agreed too. All because one little girl chose kindness over power, and one janitor never forgot that everyone, from emperors to maintenance workers, deserved to be treated with dignity. Sometimes the people who change the galaxy aren't the ones seeking power. Sometimes they're just the ones brave enough to care. Retry.